Hello, grade 11s. Welcome back to the channel. In today's lesson, we're going to be looking at number patterns, and we are specifically looking at quadratic patterns. So without any further ado, let's get down to this question that we have here. So we have question 5. It says gray and white squares are arranged into patterns as indicated below. So we can see that we have gray and white squares. So the gray ones are these ones, and then the white ones are this, right? Then we are given pattern 1, pattern 2, pattern number 3. So to confirm that, we can see number of gray squares 5 in pattern 1. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then pattern 2, we have 13 gray squares. And then pattern 3, we have 25 gray squares, right? Then the question that we have, so below here, we are given the number of gray squares in the n pattern is given by Tn is equal to 2n squared plus 2n plus 1, right? So we are given the general formula for the number of gray squares, right? So this is the pattern that determines the number of gray squares. So even if you were to test it here, if you substitute in 1 here, then you'd obviously get 5. If you substitute 2, because this is pattern 2, you'd get the 13. And then if you substitute 3, you'd get the 25, right? So this is the Tn, or the rule that determines the pattern for the number of gray squares. But 5.1 is asking how many white squares will be in the fourth pattern. Now, if you are to realize what happened here, we can see that counting the number of white squares here, the 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 4 white squares, but then we have 5 gray squares. In this one here, we have 13. We have 13 gray squares. But then if we were to count the number of white squares, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? So we have 12 white squares, right? So with this, we can almost see that the relationship that the pattern of the gray squares and the white square have is that the number of white squares are always 1 unit less than the number of gray squares. So if we have 5 gray squares, then we end up with 4 white squares. Here we have 13 gray squares, then we have 12 white squares. For this one, we have 25 gray squares. Then if you were to count, you'd find that you have 24 white squares, right? So that means we can generate the Tn, or the rule for the number of white squares, right? By saying the number of white squares, let's say we indicate it as Tk. So Tk, this represents the pattern, or the general term for the pattern of the white squares. Then it will be Tn minus 1, right? So it will be the pattern, or the general term for the pattern of the gray squares, minus 1, because every time we can see that the number of white squares are always 1 unit less than the gray squares. So that means we'd end up having this. This would be Tk is equals to 2n squared plus 2n plus 1 minus 1. So this would give us 2n squared plus 2n, right? Remember, 1 minus 1 will just give us 0. So this would be the formula that determines the number of the white squares in each pattern. So to determine the fourth term, we simply do this. So this is T4, and then 2, 4 square plus 2, and then 4 there. So we simply just do that and then press in our calculator. Then this would give us, let's punch. So this would be 40, right? So this will just be 40. So for that 2 marks, that's what you do. You just needed to manipulate this so that you produce the formula for the number of white squares, right? So that's how you could have tackled 5.1. Then let's proceed. We have 5.2. It says, determine the number of white squares in the 157th pattern, right? So because now we have already manipulated that to produce the Tn or the n term for the white squares, so this is 2n squared plus 2n. That means we can simply find the number of white squares in the 157th pattern by saying T157. So where there is n, we just substitute the 157, then that's square, then 2 times 157. Then it's just a matter of punching all this in the calculator. Then let's find out. So we will have, in T157, we'll have 49,612 white squares. Right. So that's the number there. And that's how you could have calculated 5.2. Then let's proceed to 5.3. It says calculate the largest value of n for which the pattern will have less than 613 gray squares. So this one is asking about the gray squares. That means we have to equate this to the Tn here, because this Tn is speaking for the number of gray squares. So what are we going to do? We'll say 2n squared plus 2n plus 1, but must be less than 603. So that's less than 613, meant to say 613. Then we have to say 2n squared plus 2n, then plus 1 minus 613, less than 0. Right, so this will give us 2n squared plus 2n minus 612, right? So if we divide everything here by 2, we'll end up with n squared plus n. So if we say 612 divided by 2, that gives us minus 306. So here we are dealing with a big number, 306, which it might be kind of difficult to find the factors in here. So we'll just go ahead and use the quadratic formula, right, in order to find the factors. So let's go ahead and use the quadratic formula. So punching that in our quadratic formula. So this gives us 17. So I will write it as n minus 17. And then if we change the sign, it gives us n is equal to negative 18, so which I will say n plus 18, and then say less than 0. So because we are working with an inequality, we say critical values, and then our critical values of 18, this is not applicable, right? Because remember, our n is a position and therefore cannot be a negative. So we are left with 17. But then remember, the question says calculate the largest value of n for which the pattern will have less than. Right. So that means for n is equal to 17, this is where we're going to get our value as 613, right? So for the 17th term, we have 613 gray squares. But then we are looking for the largest value for which the pattern will have less than. So that means it has to be an integer that comes before 17. What is the integer that comes before 17? It is definitely 16. So our solution here is not 17, but then it is a value that is less than 17, right? The largest value that is less than 17 is 16. Right, so that means the largest value of n for which the pattern will have less than 613 gray squares is 16, right? So correct. That's how you could have tackled 5.3. Then let's proceed. We have 5.4. It says show that the total number of squares in the nth pattern is always an odd number. So here we are not talking about the gray squares or the white squares individually, but then we are talking about the whole number of squares. So that means it's the number of gray squares plus the number of white squares. Now, if we wanted to find the rule that determines the total number of squares, that means we'll have to take the pattern or the general term for the number of gray squares add it to the general term of the number of white squares. So that means Tn for total will be 2n squared plus 2n plus 1 plus 2n squared plus 2n, right? So remember, this one is the general term for the number of gray squares, and this one is the general term for the number of white squares. So we want to determine the total number of squares. So our Tn would be this, and this are like terms, so that's 4n squared. Then 2n and 2n are like terms, that's 4n. Then we have plus 1. So this would be the formula to determine the number of squares in each pattern, right? So this is the number of squares in each pattern. So we want to prove, or we want to show that the total number of squares will always be an odd number, right? So how do we go about this? We say if we had 4, Tn is equals to only 4n squared plus 4n. So if we only had 4n squared plus 4n, that means Tn will be an even number. So Tn will be an even number for n element of real numbers where n is greater than 0. Remember, n is greater than 0 because always when you substitute your value for n, it must be positive. Remember, n represents the position and therefore will always be positive, right? Then if we were to substitute here, even if you were to think of an odd number, as long as you are multiplying it with an even number here, then it will come out as an even number, right? So for any value of n that you will think of and then substitute it here, it will always give you an even number. So that's what this means. But for Tn is equal to 4n squared plus 4n plus 1. So because we are adding an odd number, then that means Tn will be an odd number. So Tn will be an odd number for n element of real numbers where n is greater than 0. So this time around, when you substitute, remember, when you substitute in this only, you will have an even number. But then what makes an odd number is taking an even number and then adding it to an odd number. So if you are taking an even number added to an odd number, you will always have an odd number, right? So for example, if I take 6 and add 3, then that means I will have 9. 9 is an odd number, right? So this is an even number, an odd number, it gives me an odd number, right? So it's still the same thing even if I were to subtract. 6 minus 3 is equals to 3. So 6 is an even number, 3 is an odd number, the resulting answer is an odd number. So this is what you are actually doing. So this does not really require any calculations, guys. It's just a matter of explaining the relationship of numbers. So always this question gets a lot of you guys because you want to come up with calculations in order to prove that, but then this is just simply explaining the relationship of numbers to say that I understand that if you add an even number with an odd number, you will always have an odd number resulting. So that's it, guys. I think all that makes sense. So remember, when you are doing these questions, make sure that you pause the video and then try to solve the questions on your own and check them against my solution. So question 6 says sticks are arranged in patterns as shown below. So we have pattern 1 formed out of 2 sticks, and then pattern 2 we have 7 sticks as indicated, and then pattern number 3 we have 15 sticks, right? So let's look at the questions that we have. 6.1 says, write down the number of sticks needed to build pattern 4 if the patterns are consistent, right? So if the patterns are consistent, we can see that this is a quadratic pattern. So all that we need to do here is to write this. So we have 2, 7, 15, and then the difference here, 7 minus 2, that's 5, and then 15 minus 7, that's 8. So we know that the first difference is not consistent, but then we have a consistent second difference, right? So from 5 to 8, that's 3. Sorry for that. Then in order to find the fourth pattern, we obviously need to consider the fact that the second difference will be consistent. So we have 3 here. So if we have 8 plus 3, that's 11. Then we need to add this 11 to 15 so that we find the number of sticks in the fourth pattern, right? So that's 15 plus 11. That equals to 26. So we would need to have 26 sticks in order to build pattern number 4. And that's all that you needed to do. So here we have 26. Then 6.2 says determine a formula to calculate the number of sticks needed to build pattern N. So once they tell you about pattern N, that means what they're actually looking for is the nth term, right? So here they're looking for the nth term, or they're looking for the general formula, right? Or they are looking for Tn. Remember, nth term, general formula, and Tn all mean the same thing, right? So even here they said determine the formula. So it should be a hint to you, right? So in order to determine the formula, what is it that we need to do? We obviously have to use this. So remember, from here we have this one here, the second difference. We know that we have to equate it to 2a, and then so the second difference equated to 2a, the first difference equated to 3a plus b, and then we have the values of the pattern, equate them to a plus b plus c, right? So let's calculate it. Let's go ahead. So we have 2a is equals to 3. If we divide both sides by 2, our a is equals to 3 over 2. So in order to find b, we just go. Remember, the one that we are using is this one, the first branch, right? Don't forget that we are using the first branch there. Then the 3a plus b is equals to, now we're here, is equals to 5. So we'll say 3 over 2 plus b is equals to 5. So obviously at this point we need to say b, and then if you multiply this, what is 3 times 3 over 2? That's equals to 9 over 2. So we'll have 5 minus 9 over 2, right? So our b is 5 minus 9 over 2, which will give us 1 over 2, right? So if we have this 1 over 2, in order to find c, we need to say a plus b plus c, but now equated to what? To this 2 here, right? So the a was 3 over 2, then the b is 1 over 2, then plus c is equals to 2. That's equals to 2, right? So that's 2 plus c is equals to 2. So the c would be 2 minus 2, which is 0. So that means our Tn is equals to 3 over 2n squared plus 1 over 2n. So we don't have the value of c because the value of c is just 0. So we won't put anything there. So that means our Tn is 3 over 2n squared plus 1 over 2n. So that's how we needed to calculate the 6.2. So we only needed the formula. The formula, we got it. It's here, right? So, okay, now that you have that, 6.3 is asking how many sticks would you need to build pattern 16, right? So in order to build pattern 16, you have Tn is equals to 3 over 2n squared plus 1 over 2n. So in order to calculate T16, you just substitute 16 where there's n, right? So where there's n, you just put 16, right? And then you just carefully punch it in your calculator. So we have 3 over 2 and then 16 square plus 1 over 2 multiplied by 16. So that gives us a total of 392 sticks. So we need 392 sticks in order to build pattern 16, right? Then done with that one. So let's look at 6.4. 6.4 says calculate the maximum value of n if you only have 126 sticks to build pattern N. So you have 126 sticks available. So we want to determine the value of N, the maximum value of N, right? So that means we can take the pattern that we have 3 over 2n squared plus 1 over 2n, and then we say it must be equal to 126, right? Because we have 126 sticks, and then we are looking for the number of terms or the pattern in which we will form that, right? So this is 3 over, so we have 3 over 2n squared plus 1 over 2n. Then if we bring it over to this side, this is 126 is equals to 0. So at this point, what we want to do is just multiply both sides by 2 so that we are no longer working with fractions, right? So we don't want to work with fractions. So this 2 will cancel off with that 2 there. So we are left with 3n squared. And then the 2 will cancel off with this 2 here. So we are left with n, but then the 2 will multiply with that 126. So 2 times negative 126, that's negative 252. So again, we are working with a very big number here, which it might not be easy to find the factors, more especially because we have the value here for a, right? So you can go ahead and use your quadratic formula. Then let's just punch it in our quadratic formula and find the factors. So we have that. Then punching it in my calculator, I have the value n is equals to 9. So as a factor, I will write it as n minus 9. Right. Then let me change here. I have so for the other one, I have negative 28 over 3. So this is what I'm going to do. So I have negative 28 over 3. It's just a matter, if I want to write it as a factor, cross multiply this would be 3n, then transpose this one to this side. This is plus 28. So I'm going to write it as 3n plus 28, and then it's equals to 0. So that means my solutions are n is equals to 9, or n is equals to negative 28 over 3. But then remember, the conditions that we have with n is that it cannot be a negative, and it cannot be in a form of a fraction that will give us a decimal. So if you punch this gives you negative 9.33, which is of course a decimal. So your n cannot be negative and cannot be a decimal. So n is not equals to negative 28 over 3. Not applicable. That means the only true value that we have is n is equals to 9. So this is the maximum value of n for which we will have 120. So for which we can have 126 sticks, right, forming a pattern. So our n is equals to 9. And that's how you could have tackled this question, guys. Make sure to press the thumbs button if you have enjoyed the lesson and then you have found it helpful. Then also, if you are watching the channel and you haven't subscribed, press that subscribe button and press that bell notification button so that you are notified of every video that I post. And don't forget to share the link with your friends and classmates so that they may also be assisted. Remember, we are winning as a team.